Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this lecture. This lecture is centered on droughts, using UNESCO sites as a reference point. This is the outline for the lecture. So I'll begin by talking about drought and water scarcity. We'll be looking at water challenges in UNESCO sites, some adaptation and mitigation strategies that have been taken by some sites of UNESCO across the globe, and then we'll be looking at some policy recommendations and future directions. So I assume that a number of you may be familiar with the topic of drought. So we will look into how we can make this more comprehensive for the understanding of the wider audience that are participating in this hybrid university. So let's begin with introduction to drought and water security. When we talk of droughts, it's very simple. We are talking about a period of prolonged scarcity of water, and it's one of the most important weather-induced phenomena which may have severe impacts on different areas such as agriculture, the economy, talking of energy production and society. It's basically about water, water levels that are influenced by changes in precipitation and also changes in temperature. Droughts are normally, temporal, conditions, but they can also become very intense, as a result of climate change. Unlike, hurricanes that are really a bit quick, droughts are quite slow, but they can be really very long as a result of climatic variability. Four types can be distinguished. There is what we call agricultural drought, which is basically looking at soil moisture content, where we have, water levels in the soil that is inadequate to sustain the growth of crops, and thereby leading to reduction in crop yields, increasing the risk of crop failure, and also having serious implications on food security. And in fact, this is the type of drought that is mostly researched. And talking of soil moisture is not only applied even in the agriculture sector, but also if you look at forest ecosystems, that's also very much dependent on soil moisture. And so once the soil moisture content goes to a much reasonably lower level, it can be categorized as agricultural drought. There's also socio-economic droughts. So this is basically looking at droughts and how it relates to livelihood, it relates to economic activities, relates to environmental conditions. And of course, you can relate the socioeconomic drought to, so for instance, if we talk of an economy like we have in most parts of Africa that's highly dependent on agriculture, then once there is high reduction in soil moisture or there's prolonged drought that is impacting on agriculture production, then certainly the agriculture contribution to GDP is going to go down. And this can also contribute to socioeconomic drought. There is also hydrological drought. This is also one very highly researched area, and it occurs when there is a lack of surface and subsurface water supply. So basically looking at water levels in reservoirs, water levels in lakes, but also groundwater resources that are impacted by climate change. There is also meteorological droughts. So meteorological droughts are region specific, and they normally occur when the water levels are below average. So here we refer mostly to precipitation. So let's say in the country A, the annual mean precipitation is, let's say, thousand millimeters, and then for the past decades, the average has reduced to 800 millimeters. We can say that there is there's meteorological drought as a result of the reduction in the average precipitation that an area receives. Drought is a phenomenon that does not know any geographical borders, and it does not only affect arid and semi-arid areas, but even regions that receive very high levels of precipitation can have some experience of drought. And it also affects both developed and developing countries. And so, as you can see from the study that was conducted by Hanel et al. 2018, drought has had a history in Europe for the past 250 years. And according to the study, the years 1921 and 1949 to 50 are found to have spatially extensive dry summers according to the Palmer Drought Severity Index. And then the period of 1942 to 1953 is regarded as one of the driest across the whole Mediterranean region. And so you can see that over the past, years, hundreds of years and decades, drought has been, a condition that European countries are dealing with as a result of climate change that is affecting, the distribution of rainfall and also affecting, the temperature variability in the region. And of course, depending on, the variations in temperature and precipitation, you could have, moisture levels in soil also varying and sometimes getting to levels that are not able to sustain the productivity of crops. And if this happens, the risk of crop failure is going to increase, crop production is going to reduce, and this will have impacts on food prices and overall food security in the region. In Africa, the study by Thornton et al. 2010 also clearly demonstrates that because of increased drought as a result of climate change, the length of crop growing periods are also drastically declining. And we can see that there are some regions in sub-Saharan Africa that are, experiencing more than 20% loss in crop growing season. So again, this has serious implications on food security because most agriculture activities are rainfall dependent. And so increasing drought frequency and severity mean that the risk of crop failure is going to increase, and this will have implications on the production of major food crops, like cereals, maize cultivation across the continent, and also again implications on livestock for pastoralists, because there will not be enough fodder to feed livestock in the region. In Central Asia, future projections show likelihood of increased agricultural drought due to decreased soil moisture. This is according to a recent study that was published in Nature. And we can see from the chart that soil moisture has been declining since 2010, and the model projections are showing a trend that is in fact very scary because the decline is going to go even beyond 2070, and this is as a result of reduced precipitation that is likely to hit the region. And so this again will have implications on agricultural productivity, especially where irrigation levels are very minimal. Now let's look at water challenges in UNESCO sites. At UNESCO, we support our member states in designating sites that have very unique characteristics in terms of biodiversity, in terms of geology, in terms of universal outstanding value or cultural significance, as designated sites so that they can be protected for posterity. And then these sites also provide the platform for conducting research, a platform for generating knowledge, the platform for educating and also building models that help us understand how human development can be harmonized with nature. And so we have, for example, the biosphere reserves. At the moment, we have about 759 of these biosphere reserves in 136 countries. And basically, they are, like I mentioned before, these are areas where we are testing different approaches, we are testing different technologies that help us understand, how humans can build peace with nature. So, adopting innovative, eco-friendly practices that enable, settlement, enable infrastructure, enables, the establishment of recreational facilities without compromising on the ecological or the environmental integrity of vital ecosystems. We also have the UNESCO Global Geoparks. So these are also areas that have very important geological heritage that needs to be protected for posterity. And again, these sites enable education, they enable research, they enable testing, different approaches and technologies that help us to also understand, how certain development, infrastructure developments, recreational facility development, ecotourism, and others can be, integrated into protected areas. So that we don't compromise on the geological heritage that they provide. And again, we have the World Heritage Sites. This could be cultural or natural, and they have some outstanding universal value. Some of these heritage sites host species that are endangered and they need to be conserved, or the places need to be preserved in a way that we don't, cause damages to these vital ecosystems or sites. So all of these sites that UNESCO supports member states to designate for sake of posterity can also be affected by drought. And it is very important that managers of these sites understand the challenges and also the various approaches by which they can mitigate or minimize the impact of drought that is imposed by climate change on this side, so that the ecological significance or the ecosystem services that they provide could be improved or sustained. Now let's look at some of the challenges of drought in these UNESCO sites. Droughts in UNESCO designated areas can cause reduced water availability for ecosystems and human use. So we're looking at droughts, impacts on river flows, causing drying of wetlands, lowering groundwater levels, and also having implications on the overall water scarcity in the area. And sometimes you can have drought inducing conflicts among people, especially pastoralists in the Sahel areas. We also see drought impacting on biodiversity and ecosystem services, and so where you have aquatic and terrestrial species relying on water sources, the impact of drought can cause, the death of these species, and so the risk levels always increase. There's also loss of water bodies, that can lead to habitat fragmentation, reduced biodiversity, overall disruption in ecosystem services, such as water purification, carbon sequestration. And as we already looked at, the the different types of drought, we said that we can also have socioeconomic drought. And so once the drought severity increases within UNESCO sites, it can also lead to some socioeconomic challenges for local communities. And of course, there can be some implications on policy and governance in relation to water management. So these are some of the challenges that UNESCO sites, encounter when it comes to issues of drought. And of course, we need to intensify research in order to be able to unravel, some of these challenges and how they can be mitigated in the long term. Now let's look at some of the adaptation and mitigation strategies that some of these sites have adopted in order to minimize or mitigate the impact of drought. And here I'm just going to focus on the UNESCO biosphere reserves. Look at adaptation and mitigation strategies. And so when there is drought, it has to be mitigated because the impacts can be very severe. And so either we take proactive measures in order to minimize the impacts of the occurrence of droughts, or we take reactive measures where we try to again lessen the impact of a prevailing drought condition. And so if you look at the literature, there's a number of approaches, strategies that have been adopted by biosphere reserves in different parts of the globe. And so if we look at Africa, for instance, take an example from the Mount Kenya Biosphere Reserve, this is a region that experiences, frequent droughts that affect both agriculture and water supply. And so what has been done over the years is community-led afforestation, reforestation efforts to help maintain watershed integrity, to minimize the impact of the drought. If we look at Asia, there's also the Sundarban Biosphere Reserve, which is within India and Bangladesh. So in these biosphere reserves, rising temperatures and erratic rainfall patterns have been impacting on freshwater availability. So what has been done over the years is trying to harvest rainwater and also adopting community-based mangrove restoration to prevent saltwater intrusion. There's also the Rhone Biosphere Reserve in Germany, and in this area climate change has led to reduced groundwater recharge and agricultural stress. And what is being practiced as a mitigation measure is sustainable land use practices and farmer-led water conservation projects. In Latin America, there's also the Mapimi Biosphere Reserve in Mexico. This is a semi-arid area that is very vulnerable to prolonged droughts. And so the community there have been using traditional water harvesting technique, which is also combined with some modern irrigation systems to reduce or minimize the impact of droughts in this biosphere reserve. So these are some examples. Of course, there could be many other approaches like agroforestry practices. There are a number of activities that can also support that, especially where agriculture activities are very intensive within the biosphere reserves. Farmers also use climate information services. They also use these services to plan the agriculture activities in order to reduce the risk of crop failure. Some farmers also use drought-resistant varieties of crops to reduce the impacts of drought. Now let's look at some policy recommendations and future directions. For UNESCO sites, especially biosphere reserves that can be used or that can support, the management of water and also the mitigation of the impact of droughts on these important sites. In looking at policy, one way by which we can reduce the impacts of drought biosphere reserves is integrating water management policies into biosphere reserve plans. When biosphere reserves are designated, the country has to support a management plan. And in that management plan, they don't have to only talk about the governance issues, but also the plans that they want to undertake in order to, maintain the or to sustain the eligibility of this site to always qualify to be a biosphere reserve. So basically talking about the ecological integrity, the cultural, importance of the area, the socioeconomic importance of the area that has been designated. So all these have to be preserved. They have to be sustained in order to maintain the status of the area as a biosphere reserve. And so looking at the impact of droughts on these sites, it is very important that drought management becomes an integral component of the many plans or strategies that are developed for biosphere reserves, because this is very, very important in order to reduce or to mitigate the impact of drought. There's also the need, for a cross-border water sharing agreements for biosphere reserves spanning multiple countries. There are a number of biosphere reserves that are transboundary, and they share some, water resources. In some countries, you have water moving from from upstream to downstream. And so it is very important that there's some management approaches in place, or there's some agreement in place in order to ensure that the downstream areas that are receiving water from the upstream, they continue to receive this water supply without any challenges. And of course, there's the need for knowledge exchange, establishing platforms where different water management approaches that have been adopted by different sites could be shared. And then also we need to strengthen collaboration between scientists, policymakers, and local communities. In fact, policymakers need the evidence of science to be able to make certain informed decisions on governance. Then there's the need to establish these platforms as one way by which we can have a sustainable solution to deal with the issues of drought. And of course, you can have policies without evidence, and so there's the need for multidisciplinary research to provide insights into drought impacts and also solutions. And now I use this opportunity to cover a bit about the research coverage of drought and biosphere reserves. And so we did a short scoping study, trying to see in the literature what could be the coverage. So spanning from 1995 to at the end of 2024, we were able to retrieve about 3,762 research on biosphere reserves. And it is very interesting for you to know the geographical distribution of these researches. And so a bulk number of the research, came from the United States, followed by China. Then we have India, Mexico, Germany, UK, Spain, Australia, Canada, and Brazil. So these are the top kind of 10, 15 countries that had very high research coverage on the issues of drought within the UNESCO Biosphere Reserves. And of course, if you look at the documents by subject area, majority of them, of course, as expected, came from the environment and the agricultural field. And so a lot of the drought researches are very high concentrated in this area. And then, of course, if you look at it by documents, a number of the documents are published as research articles. So that again also demonstrate the fact that there's very high, or intensive, primary research on drought within UNESCO biosphere research. There are a couple of examples. So, for instance, there's a paper that looked at severe drought monitoring by remote sensing methods and its impact on wetland birds assemblies in Nuntasi and Tuzla Lakes, Danube Delta Biosphere Reserve. I think this was conducted in some parts of Europe, and clearly demonstrating that we can use, of course, remote sensing methods in monitoring drought. And here they were looking at drought impact on wetland beds, and as expected, it was clearly demonstrated that drought is impacting on the distribution of these birds within the lake catchment areas. And then there's also another research that looked at satellite data track spatial and temporal declines in European beech forest canopy characteristics associated with intense drought events in the Rhone Biosphere Reserve, central Germany. Again, this research clearly demonstrated that drought is affecting the forest canopy characteristics. Again, demonstrating that drought can have serious repercussions or serious negative impacts on forest ecosystems and the vital ecosystem services that provide. I want to believe that you've had a very good understanding of droughts, how it impacts UNESCO sites, and some mitigation measures that are in place that you can learn from, for the biosphere reserve in your area. And you have also understood some, policy actions that are necessary to be able to minimize the impact of drought on the UNESCO sites. Thank you very much for your attention, and we look forward to receiving your questions.